We've coded our statement. It just doesn't look like much of a program. There's no programming without using variables. Variables are a fundamental concept of any programming language. To declare a variable in code, we use var keyword. Variable is basically a named value in a computer's memory. Imagine computer memory as a gigantic dresser with trillions of drawers. We put something in a drawer, stick a label on it so that we can find it later. The same way, we use names to refer to values of our variables. One thing we can do with variables is to modify them. They're variable. In our calculations for Jenny, those could be the price of the purchase, the amount of daily savings, and the number of days that Jenny needs to save in order to reach her goal. We define them once and never change them. They don't really need to be variable. There is a variation of variables in Swift for those that need not or should not be modified. Those are constant, and they're called constants. To declare those in Swift, we use let keyword instead of var. And Swift will not let you modify constants, even if you attempt to. It will generate an error, keeping you safe from accidental mistakes. To sum up, variables are declared with keyword var and can be modified. Constants are declared with the keyword let and cannot be modified. Next, how do we come up with the names for variables? We use context. What is the variable for? For example, the amount we need to collect refers to the price of the future purchase, so we can name it simply price. It gets more complicated with savings. We may want to use more words to describe a variable, such as daily savings or daily allowance. Looks good as a phrase to say, but we cannot use spaces in the names of variables. We need to merge them together. To make it more readable, we can use a very popular naming convention called CamelCase. That's when the first letter of the word is spelled in uppercase and the rest of the letters in lowercase. Could we just name our variables with simple letters like A or B? Certainly, except in 5 minutes or less, you'll forget what they mean. Guaranteed. It's like labeling our drawers for socks and pants with A's and B's. I recommend that you always use descriptive names for your variables, even if they become lengthy. Next, we can come up with the most descriptive names for our variables, but they only define what we have in our code. Sometimes we need to clarify the code a little further and make a note of why we used one approach and not another. For that, we use comments. Comments is regular text in the code that is ignored when the code is executed. They play a very important role to help you and your team members to better understand the code. You may say, why would you need a reminder? You wrote it yourself. I encourage you to play this game. Do not comment a complex piece of code and come back to it next day, in a week, and for the sake of an experiment, come back to it in a year. During this year, however, take my word for it, comment your code. There are 2 types of comments you can use in your code, a single line and multi-line. To mark a single line comment, you need to indicate the beginning of your comment using // and the rest of the line until the next one will be considered as a comment. To mark a multi-line comment, you need to surround your text in the opening and closing markers. Lots of new stuff. Let's go back to our playground and apply all this to our code.
As we established, there is no programming without variables. To declare a variable, we use keyword var. Let's continue with our salary example and create a variable annual revenue and assign it the value of 50. Referring back to our dresser analogy, what we did here is took one drawer, labeled it annual revenue, and put 50 inside. Now, looking back at our savings calculation, let's see how we can improve it. We can create two more variables to hold the calculation, first year profit and second year profit, and then improve our average calculation by using variables instead of numbers. As you can see, I'm using very descriptive names here and following CamelCase naming convention. This is great. Remember our calculation for Jenny? Let's use variables to do just that. We can create two variables, price and daily allowance, and then calculate how many days we need to save. So we've got a third variable in our project, saving days. And as we can see on the right, on the output panel, the number is the same, 149 days. A variable in Swift means it varies, means it can be changed. As we look at our code, we assign a value to each of our variables once and never change it again. Luckily, there is a variation of variable in Swift. It's called constant. Constants are like variables, except their values cannot change after they've been assigned. To declare a constant, we use a keyword let instead of var. For example, we have a constant here, named constant, with value 2. Let's go back to our annual revenue variable. We declared it as a variable. Let's see what happens if we try to assign different value to it. Everything seems to be fine. Now, let's change the annual revenue declaration to let and make it a constant. As we can see, the Xcode tells us right away that we have an error, that we cannot change our annual revenue value because it's a constant. Let's change it back for now. What about our smart bean variables? We're not changing them anywhere in the code. Let's make them constants instead. As our code is growing and improving, it's time to introduce comments. We can use descriptive names for our variables and constants. We can also structure nicely the logic of our code. However, those components demonstrate what we do in our code. But we also need to describe why we chose to do one thing and not another. Comments come to a rescue at this point. We can use two types of comments, single line and multi-line. Single line comments start with // and the rest of the line is considered a comment. For example, we mark this as initial data and then print our constant. What we need to remember here is that the whole line after the // is considered a comment and not put actual code accidentally at the end of the line. If, say, by accident we move this line of code at the end of the comment, we get an error, because now the declaration of our constant became a comment. So when we try to print it, our constant appears that it doesn't exist. Let's move it back for now. We can also use multi-line comment. In order to do that, we need to mark the beginning of it and the end of it. So everything in between the markers is considered a comment. We can add another one here. Let's make it multi-line. In this case, only the text between the markers is considered comments. For example, if we move our code after the comment and finish it off with a comment, nothing changes. We don't get an error in this case. All right, let's clean up our project. Remove the code that we're not going to need in our smart bean calculation and add some comments to our declaration. Here we go, our code is nice and clean and we're ready to move on.